So let's move on to the other big company. As Zaravka kind of put it really well, like they were sort of the DC and Marvel of the adventure game scene. LucasArts, or Lucasfilm Games, and it was changed to LucasArts in 1992. Sadly, a company no longer around since the Disney buyout. They actually got shut down, but they still exist. The IP still exists there. But anyway, they were the other company, and a big company. And I would say, whereas Sierra popularized adventure games, I think LucasArts perfected them. Because the thing that LucasArts really brought into and leaned heavily on was the point-and-click aspect. Now, the point is their first adventure game was not a point-and-click adventure game. The first adventure game was actually in '86. It was called Labyrinth. It was based on the Jim Henson movie by the same name that was made by Lucasfilms.
Yeah.
And that game introduced the verb system, where you no longer have to type the commands, but you actually pick your actions from a list, and that's how you controlled the characters. But then in 1988, when they made Maniac Mansion, they basically did the same system, but they added the point-and-click interface. It wasn't like, I'm not saying that Maniac Mansion was the first point-and-click adventure game. There were actually other examples before then, but I would say Maniac Mansion was what really made it the thing that other adventure games accepted and took it on. And then, of course, 2 years later, they came out with a game called The Secret of Monkey Island, and then that, I think, was another big revolution for the genre and became, for a time, the game to be that other adventure games looked up to. And like I said, they did a lot less games than Sierra. There were only, for the engine that they did for the Maniac Mansion engine, which was the Scum engine, they did 12 games using that engine, and then 3 others. One of them was Labyrinth. But they did their games for a much shorter time, and I think that was because they had less resources than Sierra did. But their games equally, I would say, if not even more iconic. And those were the games that I personally grew up on. And so where to begin?
I think for me, at least LucasArts, if it's okay, I don't want to intrude, but LucasArts has been always big. Like I really like Sierra games, but LucasArts was special because I just started finally really getting into like in the last years. Although I have to get into it again to play the Indiana Jones games.
Oh yeah.
Because I loved Indiana Jones as a kid, and I always wanted to play that. And I find it's kind of sad that, for example, the Angry Video Game Nerd, when he talked about the Indiana Jones games, he mentioned other ones, but he never mentioned the adventure games. And I'm like, that's like the best games, because you had the first one, which is actually the third movie, and then you had the Atlantis game, the sequel.
of Atlantis, yeah.
And when I was a kid, I was always thinking that if they would ever make a fourth movie, then they should base it off of that. And I haven't even played the game, but just the idea.
That was interesting. That was actually, for the longest time, it was the shorthand name for Fate of Atlantis was actually in before. But I think the reason he overlooked it is that I don't think James Rolfe has ever been a big PC gamer, and on top of that, he stated that he's not very good at adventure games, so that's another reason probably.
Yeah, they actually did play.
There was an updated version of that video where he included both NES games, the same title.
I need to check it out, because he did say the Super Nintendo game, which was like the Super Nintendo Star Wars games.
Oh yeah, and
those are really good. I like them as a platformer. Yes.
But it's good that you bring that up. Is that there weren't that many. Really, Monkey Island was the only game by them that had like a bunch of sequels made to it. And then there were a couple of other games that had sequels, but they were only like 2 games then in the overall. And it's important to mention Sierra and then mention LucasArts, because Ron Gilbert, the man who made Maniac Mansion, the man who made The Secret of Monkey Island, he basically used the Sierra games as an example of what not to do in the LucasArts adventure games. So he got rid of a lot of the things like making the characters die on a whim and having the player get stuck, and basically like he wanted basically players to have that's the big thing about Secret of Monkey Island, was that it gave the players the sort of the leisure of going about solving the puzzles without the overbearing fear of death hanging over them, basically. But then you mentioned Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade, the adventure game, is also super important, because one thing you might have noticed about those early Sierra adventure games, when you had conversations, when you talked to characters, it was all like predetermined text that just popped up on the screen, and then you would click and it went away. But then what Indiana Jones 3, Indy 3, the adventure game, did, it introduced us to the concepts of dialogue trees. And so, and especially with Secret of Monkey Island, they became an increasingly bigger part of adventure games. So the conversations you had with characters was also a big part of the game. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to say this because with Monkey Island, that's actually one I have played through, and I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, finally, like after years of wanting to play it, like I think last year or 2 years ago, I finally played it through. And the way how I play adventure games now is that the one thing that has kept me from finishing an adventure game is always I get frustrated, I get stuck. And where I've gotten much better at puzzles, but I have usually a walkthrough next to me, or what. There's a program also called the. Well, I just want to say, or a hint book, ideally. Like there's one. It's called the Universal Hint System. It's a website. Where you can also
I know
download.
that one. Yeah.
But you gotta like pay for it, and I'm like, for a lot of the games, if you want to have it. And
but there's a lot of free ones too.
There's a lot of free ones, and I have used it for certain ones that are really challenging. And for me, I've determined, how do you determine, you can determine very easily if a platformer or a shooter or a shmup is hard, but how do you determine how hard an adventure game is? Well, I've determined it is, if you don't have to check the walkthrough even once, then it's an easy one. If you have to check it once, then it's already moderately hard. It's like the more you have to check the walkthrough, the tougher the game is, you know? So that's how I kind of think of it.
Well, naturally.
Yeah. And I have the walkthrough next to me, but I only check that one puzzle, and ideally I only check a little hint, because often that's enough for me, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing about why the dialogue expansion, the expansion of the dialogue mechanic was really important to adventure games, because that was one way to give hints to the player. Like even as a kind of a side note to this conversation, like a character might drop something, like a hint to something like Secret of Monkey Island. The first time I ever got stuck in that game was trying to get into the mansion with the piranha.
Oh yeah.
And it's something I missed the clue completely where it was about maybe you could drug the dogs or something. And this is this is a spoiler for anybody who doesn't know the puzzle, but you're supposed to pick these flowers and put them inside a piece of meat and throw it to the dogs. Right. So that's that's kind of like the more obscure ones. But usually what I find what Ron Gilbert said about adventure games is very true, that it's always better to have multiple puzzles that the player can kind of think about at the same time and go and solve, because in that game you have the 3 trials, quite literally, at the very beginning.
Right.
And so you can go there's the sword fighting trial, there's the treasure hunting trial, and then there's the thievery trial, which involves going into the mansion. So, and you can go and do those in whatever order you wish, whatever you choose.
It's not as linear, basically. You got eventually you need all 3 to progress the main story further. Yes. But he has a point, because also when I did play through Maniac Mansion. But I actually, funny, again, I played the old one also, the original, which I like a lot. But somebody has made a really good remake where the graphics are slightly updated.
Yeah,
but it's something I enjoyed it a lot, because not only do you have multiple things to do, you can also, what I really like about this game, you can choose your team, kind of like a role-playing game almost, where you can choose your team.
That's a very unique.
Everybody has a skill. Everybody has a specific skill, and that's also the way how you can get the different endings of the game. And I've gotten like certain endings. I haven't like finished it in every ending, so I can go back and replay that game. That's why I like Maniac Mansion quite a lot. Because you have these choices, There's a lot of, and that's, I think, where Ron Gilbert was starting with that idea.
Yeah, and it was like, it's funny that he started the game without really knowing what kind of a game it was going to turn out, and then it became one of the most important games of all, for LucasArts in general. But it was also the game with which they started actually publishing their own games, because they originally tried to pitch it to Electronic Arts, and they thought that the game would never sell, so that's why LucasArts started publishing their own games.
Maniac Mansion
and there's also a sequel to it called Day of the Tentacle. Now, have any of you played that?
I haven't played it yet, and please have no spoilers because
Wasn't that ported?
Yeah.
Wasn't that ported to the Sega Mega CD?
Which one?
Know that the first
Day of the
Maniac
Tentacle.
Mansion was...
No, I'm thinking of Heart of the Alien. Sorry.
Okay.
I don't know, but
the original Maniac Mansion, I know it was on the NES as well.
Yeah,
but yeah.
It was popular there.
Yeah.
There was actually a game, the NES. Actually, the thing about Maniac Mansion, those early adventure games, they transcended the PC market, where they also became at least somewhat successful on other consoles. Especially Maniac Mansion. That has been, like, I remember my friend at Critical Failure. He actually owns a boxed version of the NES Maniac Mansion, and
wow.
it's with the manual and everything, and it's really awesome because
nice.
and they made it work, and especially because of the SCUM engine, where you would play with the joypad, which is a little bit weird, but you can go and choose the commands. You don't have to write it. That's what made it so that you could have adventure games on consoles, and they were rare on consoles, but they did pop up sometimes. Like I do know that they had King's Quest V on the NES, and maybe also the first King's Quest. Well, Kaiser has said already the first King's Quest on the Master System.
Okay.
So yeah. Anyway.
Okay, and the just so we don't forget about this one, because this one's much lesser known, but it came out after Maniac Mansion, but before Indy 3, there was one called Zag McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders.
Oh yeah. Wait, I gotta. Well, I got to talk about that one because I played that one through, and I must say, talking about the no dead ends, well, that one has dead ends.
Yeah, it's widely considered like the least LucasArts of the LucasArts adventure games. So it's a bit of a black sheep of their product. Yeah,
I like it. It has a lot of
and it has a very strong cult following. That's what I've heard, but it's one of those more obscure ones.
You know what? For me, it wasn't, because I always remembered seeing it with the other games. But yeah, it never got a sequel. But I liked it had already a lot of the same humor, and even the same kind of. It had a lot of the same like character designs already, and and also the same humor. But the difference was that there was some. The problem was there was some moments where if you didn't do a certain thing to get a certain item, and you didn't have that specific item, then you would run into a dead end, and you didn't know that,
Yeah.
And when I was playing that, I got really pissed. That's like, I agree with Ron Gilbert, where I'm all for difficulty, even in an adventure game, and I don't even mind moments where your character can die, but if it's something like this where literally you have only kind of one chance of getting that item, and if you don't get that item, then you're basically fucked, and you don't know it, and you're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with that game. Otherwise, it's a good adventure game, and it's fun, and it's hilarious. You get like you have to stop like an alien invasion and everything, but
yeah,
it's very. I feel it's LucasArtsy, but it definitely, I would say, it was where LucasArts was still experimenting, and they didn't have their shit quite together.
Yeah.
When you go to Maniac Mansion and Secret of Monkey Island and Loom, even Loom, which was, I would say, even more obscure and really weird, but everybody knows Loom because
hey, Kaiser had something to say about Zag McCracken, I think.
Sorry, I wanted to actually say something about Maniac Mansion.
Sure,
Go
ahead.
I've always wanted to make a remake of my own of Maniac Mansion when I figured out how to do it, but instead of like the characters from Maniac Mansion, I want to replace it with me and my friends of Maniac Mansion. So you got me, you got Darabka, possibly you, Hunter, going through the mansion. And plus, the game Day of the Tentacle, the game Magica, that has a downloadable costume DLC, and one of them is the Tentacle from Day of the Tentacle.
Yeah, that was actually a bit sad when they announced that LucasArts had been officially shut down, because there was their Singapore wing, before they closed down, was actually, it was unofficial, so it might have never seen the light of day, but they were unofficially like experimenting with a remake of Day of the Tentacle, and that's one of those games that I really also want to get to play one of these days.
Right.
Because it was the last game that Dave Grossman, who was one of the three geniuses behind Secret of Monkey Island, because there was Ron Gilbert, of course, but he left the company like after Monkey Island 2, But there were the other two that helped him with that game, to write the jokes and puzzles and everything, were of course Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman. And Dave Grossman left after Day of the Tentacle. So
Right.
yeah, and well, okay. You mentioned Loom already, Dorabka, so you might as well go around. Loom was a kind of a weird one. It was kind of drummed up to be, because it came out around the same time as Secret of Monkey Island as well. It was drummed up to be to become like this big. It was, as I understand, it was to be the first in a series of fantasy adventure games from LucasArts. But then it didn't sell that well, and I guess that's why they never made the sequels.
I haven't played through Loom, but I thought I always was attracted to Loom because as a kid already, I was always attracted to fantasy and really weird settings, trippy settings.
Yes.
I was always.
It seems like a very
Loom is like the if you would call every LucasArts game like a person. Loom is the weird, nerdy, trippy kid who's like half hippie, half nerd that nobody knows what the fuck he's about, but it's like, where Loom. The reason what I found interesting is with Loom. The first time, of course, you hear about Loom is in Monkey Island when you go into the scum bar and there's this one guy, little spoiler,
and the guy with the to ask me about Loom button on his shirt.
Yeah, and then you ask him about Loom, and he basically it's an in-game joke, but it's also where they advertise.
Sender remembers this from our Let's Play of The Secret of Monkey Island. There's the guy in the scum bar. Whenever you say to him like "nice hat," and all he says is "oi," and then when you ask him about Loom, he gets very excited.
Yeah. So I'll watch that too. That's something I need to watch since I have played it. I can watch it now.
Oh yeah.
The point is that Loom, I did play it, and what was interesting about Loom, it's in a weird fantasy setting. We have these people, this race, this dying race, and they're all wearing these cloaks, right? And they kind of use this kind of magic using notes, kind of musical notes. And the way how you controlled and do the different puzzles, you go around the world, but the way how you do it is you got to learn the melodies of the different spells. And I haven't played it in years, so I have to replay it again.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and I've actually heard that was one of the reasons. Like it was actually very well reviewed, but I think one of the reasons why Loom then never became very popular was because most people found the puzzles to be a little too challenging.
A little bit too abstract, and the game might have been a little bit. It wasn't. It's the least mainstream game of the LucasArts games, and that's why it's become obscure.
Yeah.
But just for that one joke in Monkey Island, it's like. Also, it was weird because
it's forever with the anything LucasArts related. But yeah, it's a bit tragic. I do really want to play that game one of these days.
I played it. I want to play it again. I want to play it through because it's one of the most unique. And if you like old school adventure games, but you want to have something a little different, or a lot different in this case, then I recommend it. And another thing I want to mention is there was I don't know if it was only in the German version, but they had in Germany, there was a popular, audio plays were very popular, especially for kids.
You're talking about the cassette that came with the game.
Yeah, they had a cassette and audio.
No, they had it with the English version as well.
Yeah.
It basically came with a 30-minute opening prologue with like music and sound effects and everything.
Right. Nowadays it would be just a cutscene, right? But back then
that was the problem. There was a lot of homework with that game to get it to going.
The audio play was great, though. Honestly, I liked it. It was a good audio play, and it really got you into the mood to play the game. At least for me.
Okay.
Why didn't anyone tell me that Loom, along with a few other LucasArts games, was ported to Steam? I probably would have had that already if I knew that.
I have it on Steam. They have actually Steam has most of the games, but with some exceptions. Like they don't have the. I guess do they have the original Monkey Island games? I think you can buy the HD, and then I think you can switch.
Well, you have the original. Yeah, the original game is built into the remake because the remake just runs on the on top of the original, basically. So yeah,
fair enough.
It's a 2-in-1 deal, basically.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Speaking of Monkey Island, are we all completely ignoring that yesterday or the other day it was International 12 Like a Pirate Day as of this recording?
I've never been able to make it for. When I used to frequent one of the World of Monkey Island forums, they would always make a big deal about talk like a pirate day. But You can't really do it in Finnish, which is a big problem. So yeah,
Yar, mate.
I always missed out on that.
It wasn't
Hey.
any famous Finnish pirates, you know.
We're actually holding off on Monkey Island for a reason because I want to segue. I want to use that as a segue into the final part of this podcast. But
Okay.
if we talk about other LucasArts games for a while, there's one I'm sure some of you will have something to say about. Sam and Max Hit the Road.
Yeah, I haven't played that one sadly, but I always wanted to, and that's actually something that they did continue eventually with the episodic games.
Kaiser, have you played it? Haven't you?
No, out of all the Sam, I've only played a few Sam and Max games, but
Okay.
Hit the Road is not one of them, sadly, because I could never find that one.
Sendu?
What?
So did you ever play Sam and Max Hit the Road?
My brothers played it a lot, and I did watch a long play of it, so I do know it well enough.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's Steve Purcell.
It's funny.
Yep. What?
It's funny.
It is funny, and Steve Purcell was the creator of Sam & Max. They started, of course, as a comic that Purcell created, and Purcell worked on a lot of the early games for LucasArts. He was one of the graphic designers on Monkey Island and Loom and a bunch of others, and they always, Monkey Island games, of course, always include a Sam & Max reference. But then, finally, it went so far that Purcell was basically allowed to make his own game, which was the Sam & Max game. And, the characters continues to live off. Steve Purcell has actually gone way up in the world. Do you know what the last thing I remember him from, actually? Do you know what it is, actually? He was the screenwriter for the Pixar movie Brave.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And I did check. It's the same Steve Purcell. When I saw his name when I watched the movie, and I thought, is that the same guy? Yeah.
He picked the wrong Pixar movie to be a part of, poor bastard.
What do you think? It's a great movie. It was awesome. All right, so Sendu, is there some favorite moment you want to share about Sam and Max and that first?
Oh dear, the moments that really stand out, or how they solved the case with the Bigfoot, and also in the beginning when Max just throws that bomb out the window, and don't worry, it was just a bus.
The bit that I know about that game is when they travel to space and what they use for space helmets. That cracks me up to this day. They just put the paper bags around their head for space helmets.
Great job.
All right.
Oh my God, Kaiser! I just had an epiphany. Something just for Kaiser. Imagine that. Tim and Eric Awesome Adventure, the game. An adventure game with Tim and Eric.
I do want to see TellTale Game make something like that, but I have a feeling I'm not going to TellTale.
I don't want it to be 3D. I want it to be like old school 2D, where their characters are all like in the FMV style recorded, like Mortal Kombat or some adventure games did. I think that would be the freaking awesomeness.
Nice.
I guess that won't happen.
I was thinking of Night Trap with Tim and Eric.
There we go.
Sendu, did you ever watch the Sam and Max cartoon show, Freelance Police?
I saw a couple episodes. It was different.
I like
more
it.
kid-friendly.
I only like it through YouTube. I mean, I knew about it for years, but I only saw it on YouTube.
It was on
did have good
Fox
animation.
Kids over here.
Yeah, it did.
It was on Fox. It was on Fox Kids over here, but unfortunately, I could not afford that channel at the time.
Yeah.
Which was a shame because Digimon was also on that channel.
It's very interesting. Like Sam and Max is one of only two LucasArts adventure games that actually had television shows based on them. The other one was Maniac Mansion, which had this weird live action show based on it that ran for 3 seasons in Canada. But as far as I understand, it had very little to do with the game, so it was
it had very little to do. Most of the characters weren't in it. I think only they made it into a sitcom, and it was kind of disappointing because really, the thing about Maniac Mansion, even if you look at the cover art, it was also kind of a spoof of horror movies, especially also 80s horror movies. So I could have imagined a really cool. I had kind of a. I could totally see this as an 80s if they would have make this in the 80s as a horror movie, but as a spoof. You would have John Cusack as the main character and so on, and stuff like that. Okay. And it would be like it would have been hilarious, I think, but who knows.
Okay, and then going through the other games, there's of course the biker game Full Throttle that Tim Schafer made. Have any of you played that?
I always wanted to. I've seen it in magazines, but I always wanted to. But it's like back in the day, it was always me and my brother had to kind of come to a compromise of what game we wanted, and I don't think I could have. He wasn't interested. He was interested in the space flight simulator games more than adventure games.
Okay.
And but Full Throttle looked so cool, so badass, and I love the animation just from the screens. Like that's a game I'm like really hoping that will come to GOG or Steam. Like I would rather prefer.
Yeah, it
GOG.
should be. Yeah, it should, and it is a great game. I of course have it, and it's one of my favorites of the LucasArts line. It's a rather short game, but I don't think it's any worse for it. And it is one of the few adventure games I know that has a bit of an action sequence. You actually have like little battles on the bikes, like where you kind of go punching each other off the bikes, and also get other weapons like boards and clubs with nails in them and chains.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Man. Like I don't mind little action sequences. They're more like mini games that break up the.
Yeah, they are, but they are also used as a kind of a puzzle mechanic in the game as well, which is very, very nice, very clever. And also, it has a great voice cast. Mark Hamill's in it. But
he's a great voice actor.
Yeah,
I always thought he
plays the villain in that. But also Roy Conrad, who voices Ben, he has an amazing voice. It's one of the great ones. And actually, like if you go to Double Fine's official YouTube channel, they've only released one video of it, but they do have Tim Schafer actually playing Full Throttle, and he tells little stories and anecdotes about the making of that game. But I guess it would probably be better if you had played the game a little bit, so you know what's coming.
I want to. That's a game I pretty much want to play every one of the main Sierra games. Sorry, I don't want to always interrupt, sir.
You mean the main LucasArts games?
LucasArts games.
Yes,
sorry,
it's Sierra.
Also Sierra, both, you know.
Okay,
but especially.
But none of
that's another staple of the White Devil podcast. Honey always correcting Darabka.
There we go.
But none of you, the rest of you, you haven't played it, have you?
I was unaware of that game's existence until 2007, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame that they were going to make a sequel to it, and actually there were two different attempts to make a sequel, but both times it fell through. And the last one it fell through because LucasArts stopped making adventure games. It was one of those, along with the Sam and Max sequel, which eventually, of course, the people who went on to make TellTale, they made that, but it got canned. And it was unfortunate because from the loins of Tim Schafer's greatness, if you will, Jonathan Ackley and Larry Ahern, the animation directors for that game, later went on to, of course, make the third game in the Monkey Island series, Curse of Monkey Island. Whereas Tim Schafer, his next project was Grim Fandango, which was the first post-Scum game. Like, Curse of Monkey Island was the final Scum game.
Right.
On Scum Engine. And am I assuming correctly that none of you have played Grim Fandango?
No, I heard so much of it. I heard that they're making now a HD remake, but it's gonna be like only for the 360 or for the PlayStation 4, and I'm very disappointed in that. Where I'm like, this should be on the PC.
It's not gonna be exclusive, but it's gonna be PS4 and PCs, I think.
Oh, okay. Because at first I heard it was a PS4 exclusive, and that's pissed me off because there should be a PC version.
But
I have never played
Also, I really hope that they do release the old one too, because I guess.
Can you let Kaiser and Sendu talk, because they've been very quiet for the rest of the
I have not played Grim Fandango strictly because we didn't have the means of running that game, and by the time I did have a good computer, I had no idea how to work the emulator to help run that game, but it still feels like yesterday since Grim Fandango came out. Like I remember the day when it actually hit shelves. It's like it was an iconic moment seeing it. Like it had such a great art style to that. Like that just stuck in your mind. I still remember.
Yeah, I think because it has such a quirky style. The fact that it's 3D it's aged surprisingly well for a 3D game made in like '98.
Yep.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, the Grim Fandango is one of those. It's one of those weird instances where people are always unsure what happened with that game. Like, was it a flop or whatever? But actually, like Tim Schafer made another video where he was playing Grim Fandango and talking about it, and it was actually very important for me because I was able to see from it the emulator. And this is a big tip for anybody who does have the original game and is unable to make it run. The program you need to run it is Residual VM. It's from the same guys who made Scum VM, the emulator that you can use to play all the Scum Engine games on modern computers, and that's what you need. Go get that. You're very welcome. And
thank you, Anu.
And also, that game, it did actually sell well. The problem was, and this is why I think adventure games, they were very much in the mainstream of like PC gaming, still like in the mid '90s. It was, I imagine it was kind of the holy quaternity, or what, the holy quartet of PC gaming genres. It was the adventure game, the first-person shooters, the real-time strategy games, and the role-playing games. You know, the kind of games you would imagine playing with a mouse and a keyboard interface.
Right.
But then in the late '90s, in the mid '90s, we had the big PC boom. You know, the market got much, much bigger, and all of a sudden, like, the standards for what was considered a hit on the PC market, they suddenly, like, it bloated up immensely. And adventure games, they kind of stayed on the same level. Like, they didn't get smaller. The Grim Fandango sold about as much as, like, the Monkey Island games did in the early '90s, but the standard had changed, so it was considered not a big hit. But it sold, like, well. It actually did make money, so it wasn't a flop. But sadly, it kind of signaled that the market had changed, and, that's the thing. Like, it's what Tim Schafer has said all this time, is that the audience is there. It's always been there for adventure games. The problem is that, these big distributors, they only look at the numbers, and when the numbers are much bigger, they're not impressed by Grim Fandango and what was it, 500,000 copies that it sold or something like that.
That's the problem. It became a numbers game, and it basically what killed the adventure game. Like, adventure games have been the PC
well, it was a lot
gaming...
of things. It was a lot of things. So I don't subscribe that there's one thing, but yes, the fact that big distributors got into the mix and they look at numbers. That was one of the reasons. And that's why the crowdfunding part of it has now helped bring it back, because now the fans can actually like show direct support and actually like finance the game and the remakes and what have you.
Exactly, but what I want to say is with the adventure games, the PC gaming market, PCs were made for work, really, and gaming has been always more a secondary thing for PCs, and that's why. To a degree. Well, it's questionable, okay, at first, but then gaming became a big part of also the PC software market, but with computers in general, also there. The genres that were the major things, adventure games has been one of the main genres for the IBM and for computers in general. Other things have been like the simulators that have disappeared, plane simulators, spaceship sims, and also car games.
I don't think they disappeared so much as they've kind of just become a more...
They become a niche thing.
Yeah. But the thing I was getting at is that change happened, and when in the mid '90s we had the holy quartet of adventure of PC gaming genres. In the early 2000s, it became the unholy trinity of three-letter acronyms: the FPS, the RTS, and the RPG.
Well, the RTS has kind of disappeared, and now we have the real-time tactics game, kind of like Total War kind of thing.
Well, okay, yeah.
And it's kind of real-time strategy, but the point is that...
Let's get back to Grim Fandango, because I actually didn't... Well, I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but, people now know the remake is coming. They probably know something about it already, but it's this very film noir-esque story that's set in the afterlife. It has a lot of Aztec influences on it, and the characters are paper skeletons, which is kind of weird. But it's a very touching, moving game with healthy doses of strong content.
Hell. Ow!
Tim Schafer.
Oh, sorry. I just kicked my toes. Steve, we might have to cut that bit out.
It wouldn't be a Kaiser recording if Kaiser wouldn't hurt himself or like.
Oh, you might want to repeat what you said there, because I don't want that on the podcast. Maybe a deleted scene, but.
I didn't even hear what you said, but okay. I was just saying that it has strong film noir-esque elements, and Aztec influences. The characters are paper skeletons. It's a really moving, touching storyline, but with really healthy doses of kind of cheeky comedy, as you come to expect from Tim Schafer. If you played some of his other games like Psychonauts, Brutal Legend, and Broken Age, which is an awesome that was the game that started the whole crowdfunding craze, really, for adventure games. So, yeah, I can't wait for the second half of that game to come out.
About the paper skeleton thing, I'm pretty sure that's based on Mexican.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Mexican
you know.
and Aztecs, like South American influences all around are a big part, but also there's the film noir element of it, and kind of these. I guess you could say steampunkish, but it's like weird technology and things. Like it's a very quirky, very powerful, but also one with a very good story and a lot of comedy, like you come to expect from LucasArts games. And then, their final adventure game, of course, was Escape from Monkey Island, which I think is a logical point as any to come back around a little bit to talk about the Monkey Island games. Okay, which ones have you played? And Dorapka, you played Secret.
I played the first one through. I played some now, some of the second one, and I really enjoy it. And that's something I will finish definitely. And so I did play through the first one and some of the second one.
And Kaiser, have you played any of the Monkey Islands?
I tried to back in 2006. I actually bought the re-release of it, only to realize that it wouldn't run on my computer because I needed the.
I think you know which ones I've played, Tano.
Yeah, you of course we played together. We did a Let's Play series of the first two games.
And I also
the remade versions, and Sendu has also, I think he's played the Tales of Monkey Island. We can talk about that. And I, of course, played all of them. I own all of them as well.
But can I say one thing? Escape from Monkey Island, that sounds like there could have been great potential for a Escape from New York sort of sequel.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've talked extensively on Monkey Island in the past, and Secret of Monkey Island is still, even though it's a very simple game if you compare it to a lot of the sequels, but much like the first Larry, it's very close to my heart in that way. It's a very quaint, simple game, but it still has a lot in it, and a lot of great design, great puzzles, great music. The second game I have, of course, very mixed feelings about. When it started me with basically just hating the game, and then as time has gone on, I see more and more like positives in it. So and it's mostly because of that ending. I'm not going to spoil anything here. I'm just going to say that game has one of the most infamous endings in computer game history, and it's one of those love it or hate it sort of deals with it. But that was kind of Ron Gilbert's idea. He didn't want to make an ending that was kind of so-and-so, but he intentionally designed that ending to be as confusing as possible so that people would be talking about it for years to come, as they have. And he's been very successful. I have to take a bow to Mr. Gilbert. It did exactly what he intended to. But also with the Monkey Island games, I think like it's just the fact that one of the reasons it remains so popular. Like I think everybody just loves pirates, and even though it's a little bit more quirky and silly than that, they have a lot of anachronistic elements in those games, like record machines and things like that, washing machines and the like. But yeah, it's that fun, really frivolous atmosphere, wouldn't you say, Sendu? That's kind of the attraction of those games.
Yeah. I also really like Guybrush's passive humor.
Yeah, I mean, that's another reason. Like Larry is kind of like, in my view, the original lovable loser, but Guybrush became even more, and he doesn't. Well, maybe has a little bit of a slimy side to him, but it really comes through mostly in the later games. Well, he was very amoral in the second one too, though.
Well, but Larry is kind of the ultimate in that way, he's like he wants to be Duke Nukem in a sense, but he's more like guy put 3 push, I think I always loved the beginning of the first because I've tried to play it multiple times, and when I finally finished it, but I always loved the beginning. It's like, hi, I'm Guybrush 3 put, and I want to be a pirate.
Yeah.
You're who? And nobody can get his name straight, and I just love that.
Yeah,
it is the best joke of the entire game.
Yeah.
Just that beginning, he just pops up. Hi, I want to. Like, who says that? Who would say? That's the great part. Like, if I want to be a pirate,
Yeah. There's no parade, no like frills introduction. I'm Guybrush Threepwood, and I want to be a pirate. And it's more or less it warps into the catchphrase of his later games, like I'm Guybrush Threepwood, mighty pirate.
Like I was a fan of always pirates as a kid. That's why I did like also Monkey Island. I did watch my friend play the second one, so I think I might be familiar with the ending, but don't spoil it anyway because it has been a long time.
Yeah, the second game.
I think I know what
you're. A lot of more detail and refinement to the Monkey Island games, but it's a notoriously difficult. It is quite easily the most difficult of the Monkey Island games.
Yeah, I got stuck at a point where there's the hotel and something like that. The point is that that with pirates, I always liked pirates, so I would be attracted to anything pirates. So, and as a kid, I remember we played the game Pirates on my cousin's Commodore 64, and then we got it for the NES. And that's one of the, at least back in the day, Sid Meier's Pirates. That was one of the greatest things ever. By the way, just quick side note, and it's kind of a downer, I know, but the recently passed Robin Williams. Apparently, one thing that I heard that he was also a very enthusiastic gamer, and what I heard is that he had the idea for Sid Meier to put the Sid Meier in front of his games.
Interesting.
That was his idea apparently. So
okay.
Because he really enjoyed games, video games, board games, role playing games, war games, anything.
He named his daughter after Zelda.
Yeah, exactly. So
and it's a
Sid Meier's yeah.
And you know what? Actually, funny tidbit. I'm reminded of this is that George Lucas actually did have one. He directly had some involvement with The Secret of Monkey Island. Like most of the time, like George Lucas was very like LucasArts was allowed to kind of like operate on their own. He had like a very hands-off approach about managing that company. But when he actually did come and see an early version of Secret of Monkey Island. And he also liked it a lot, but he noticed that the main character was kind of inconsequential. Like Guybrush was originally kind of really bland character, and he basically told them, you really need to make this main character a little bit more funny. And I guess that's the point at which they start to have Guybrush make a lot of like snide comments and things like that. So we have George Lucas to thank for partially creating Guybrush Threepwood. Maybe just putting the idea in their heads, but. Yeah, that was kind of an interesting tidbit. Like that came from Tim Schafer. He actually told it on, I think it was on the second game's commentary. Like the second Monkey Island has a really good commentary with Gilbert, Schafer, and Grossman. So that's another reason to get the remake of it.
Right. No, I forgot.
I'm loving how these point-and-click adventure games have commentary over them, or just video games having commentary in general.
Yeah, I really wish they would have had it for the first one as well, but I guess they didn't just think of it. But when they did the second game's the remake of it, that's when they decided, okay, we gotta get these guys. And also another interesting tidbit, like Orson Scott Card, the author, is the guy who originally developed insult sword fighting for.
Oh, nice.
The insults for insult sword fighting. Like the idea came from Ron Gilbert.
I love the insults in those games.
Yes,
that was one of the best way to combine to make like an action sequence, but still not break the rule of making it an action game where it was.
Yeah.
Because.
One
thing I want to just
Flynn movies that inspired Gilbert. He said,
yeah.
Funny enough, the most iconic of all the insult sword fighting insults. You fight like a dairy farmer. How appropriate. You fight like a cow.
Yes. That cracks me up every time.
It was actually written by Scott Card's son because he asked him what's a popular insult around the schoolyard these days. And I think his son was just kind of sarcastically making that joke, but it ended up in the game, so that's kind of funny.
Nice.
And also,
one thing I want to say.
Yep.
Anyway, just quick. The game Pirates for Sid Meier, a very good game. Not an adventure game per se, but it has some elements of adventure games. But mostly, it's a kind of a strategy sim, even some role playing in that game. But I really liked it. But what I felt is that. How that game starts, that you're like kind of a slave and then you like it's much more realistic and much more historically accurate. And I just wanted to say I just wanted to say the comparison. I'm not dissing Monkey Island for that because it was perfect.
There's no problem with that. I'm just saying that Monkey Island follows a very cartoony interpretation of what pirates are. So it's a very,
and that's the whole point because
Yeah.
the game Pirates actually said, you know, you're like a slave and whatever, and then you like get on the ship and everything. It's like because nobody really chose to be a pirate really, and
Yeah.
and but the joke was in with that he says, hi, I'm Guy Woodfree, I want to be a pirate, like applying for a job or something, you know.
yeah. Yeah, and he has to fill the prerequisites, which are the 3 trials and everything.
Yep.
So yeah, but the Curse of Monkey Island was just the 3rd game and the final Scum game, and really like the game with which the Scum engine kind of went out with a bang, and it was, you know, Disney-esque animation, like CD quality, soundtrack and voice acting, excellent voice acting from I think a relatively unknown cast of actors who I think are like criminally underrated, like especially Dominic Armato as Guybrush, who then of course did go on to voice Guybrush in all the games, especially through the remakes, and funny enough was himself actually a Monkey Island fan. This is another interesting tidbit, like you can tell like I'm such a huge Monkey Island fan, like I know this, but Dominic Armato actually had The Secret of Monkey Island on Sega CD. He was that big of a fan, and it drove him to pursue the role of Guybrush when they made the 3rd game. Basically. So yeah, and that one is just a gem of a game, like absolutely worthwhile. Oh, I completely blanked out on this. There's one adventure game before Curse of Monkey Island that came out. It was the second to last Scum game, and I forgot to mention it completely. Have any of you heard of this one called The Dig?
Yes,
I've heard of it.
I remember my
I've never
friend playing
seen
it.
anything of it.
Can you dig the dig?
No, The Dig is actually
Can
pretty
you dig
cool
it?
because my friend played it, and it came out at the time when Myst came out, and I think it's slightly inspired, although it's not the first person, not graphically.
Is it
you know,
though?
but-
Myst was early 90s. I mean, The Dig was 96.
Yeah, but it still was Myst. Myst is another game I wanted to talk about. I haven't quite played it through, but I got really far. The point is, in Myst, like other games, changed the landscape. Myst really reinvigorated the adventure game craze because it added like first-person perspective and the whole.
Okay, but
It was Anyway, the point is, The Dig is. I thought it was really cool because it was a science fiction setting and it was also more mysterious.
yeah,
Like,
it's supposed to be more one of the more serious games actually, which is
Yes,
kind of interesting.
yes.
And I feel bad that I have never played it myself. Like
It's on Steam. I have it on Steam, so it's like they have almost
Man.
they have a lot of the
Okay.
LucasArts games. So they're missing some weirdly, but they have The Dig, and I remember my friend playing it, and I was fascinated because
Yeah.
it had really nice graphics and stuff, but it's still a very traditional point and click. But the puzzles are quite challenging, where it's like basically it's a science fiction game. I think they're on a planet and they find a mystical kind of old temple, and then there's a lot of puzzles there to be solved to see what is in there. And
Yeah.
I remember he didn't play it through when I was there, but it was interesting either way. It's
Yes.
something I definitely am curious to see what is it about.
Yeah, and I also, because of a more serious sci-fi oriented LucasArts adventure game, that would definitely be cool. But then the final LucasArts adventure game, of course, was Escape from Monkey Island. It was made on the same game engine as Grim Fandango, and it's one of those games in the series that perhaps splits opinions. Well, I think Monkey Island 2 also, but like Escape especially, and I noticed that there's a big difference between like people who got into the series a bit later versus the people who were fans from like the first game onward, who tend to kind of look at that game again as kind of a black sheep of the series. But I really like it. I will admit that there's some iffy things about it. There's a few plot holes. Like you might think that Monkey Island is a very comedy-driven game, that the plot wouldn't matter that much, but there are some rather glaring ones with that game. But I think Escape was a very bold attempt to take the Grim Fandango game engine and try to make a 3D Monkey Island game, and I think it was very successful in many ways. I really like the game, but and it actually sold better than Grim Fandango, although I think it might have been helped along a little bit by the fact that it was also ported to the PS2. But yeah, that was kind of a bold move for the series. I think a really fun game, in my opinion. Some things about it I don't enjoy, but it revisits a lot of the things from the first game, which I think, like, for somebody somebody who likes the first game, I would think would be actually very, very they would enjoy. But of course, it took a while for some of these LucasArts adventure games to reemerge. I mean, they had the remakes, but then finally there was also a fifth game, but it came from a different studio, which was TellTale. The company was formed by former LucasArts employees, and Tales of Monkey Island. I think Sendu has something to say about this. So, why don't we move on to Sendu?
Tales of Monkey Island. Wow, that's quite a vague thing. It was a really fun game, I thought. It was my first Monkey Island game I ever played.
And I was personally impressed by it, especially the story. Actually, it actually went much more serious than any of the previous installments in a weird way, but it still kept that light comedic atmosphere.
Yeah, it also had some nice characters too. Like you finally get a crew that doesn't betray you. Oh, that guy.
Oh yeah, that's always the thing with Guybrush, isn't it? That his crew always kind of tends to turn against him. That game did garner some criticism. You know, it was released episodically like all the TellTale games, but I think some fans didn't seem to get that the reason TellTale was able to make these, episodic games is that they do recycle resources. And a lot of people wanted to direct a lot of criticism at the fact that some of the characters, the incidental characters from episode to episode, they look very similar. So that was something that a lot of people had a problem with, which I personally didn't have a huge problem with, because, I mean, if there, it came out like monthly on the PC. Like I was willing to kind of forgive that, because then the scale of the story, then the cinematic nature of cutscenes, it was all still there. Like it was still like a really epic storyline, in my opinion. And I think it garnered some unwarranted criticism, in my opinion, because I also liked it a lot. I would say that's one of my absolute favorite games of the series, next to Secret and Curse.
I probably would never have played the others if not for Tales.
Yes, and also I think it was also one of the first really interesting female characters was Morgan Le Fay. I don't know how much we're spoiling here, but it had a lot of great things, and it still kept a lot of great things from like previous games.
Yeah, and each episode did keep it unique, something new. You're inside a giant something, and then Guybrush gets to breathe under. I'm trying not to spoil him. Giant manatee or something. Man, we do get to see Guybrush's holding breath underwater skills again.
Yeah,
oh,
and
no.
That was actually like I guess the one little thing was the
He had a hook.
Was the fact that, well, a little bit, I guess, couldn't be helped that they did get Michael Land to come back, who was the composer for the Monkey Island games, and his soundtracks are amazing, especially like the second and third game. I recommend checking those out just for the music. But because he had to use synthesizers to make the soundtrack for the fourth game, and there wasn't nearly as much like new memorable material. But on the other hand, they did recycle, I think, some of like the best bits of previous games' soundtracks, and it actually sounded really nice.
Yeah. Also, Guybrush had a hook for a hand. What'd you think of that?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a bit of a spoiler, I think.
Not really. It happens like
the second episode.
First episode.
Oh.
No, the second one.
Oh.
That's where Morgan cuts his hand off.
Oh, spoilers! Oh.
Well, it was cursed.
Please, no spoilers.
It was already cursed, so it wasn't a big loss. But that's the whole thing. Is that Guybrush's hand gets cursed at the beginning of the game.
As a fan of the
I will still
game,
play it in sequential order, but yeah, please.
Oh, don't worry, I didn't spoil all the fun parts.
Suffice to say, it was a really good game, and I think this is a good time as any to move on to TellTale and just other companies in general, like other TellTale games you want to.
One thing I want us to say, not about Maniac, not about what is it? Sorry, I've been eating some chocolate. Monkey Island, but instead I want to talk about again Zach McCracken, because for a time I was really obsessed with the game because it was the more obscure one out of the LucasArts, and I still like the game, but interesting enough, what I want to talk about, what I find was interesting, is the different ports for the game, especially from that time, because there was a lot of different ports where the games would look a lot
Okay,
different.
but we've talked about LucasArts for a good while now. I think we should really move on because Sendu really has a lot to say about some other companies, and I think Retro Kaiser as well. So maybe not dwell that much on the ports.
Well, I just wanted to say one port, but okay.
Okay. So
Well, there was just really quick. There was one for a Japanese computer called the FM Towns where it had more colors. It had a full CD background.
Yeah, I've heard
but
about.
what was interesting about it was definitely better graphics, a better sound and everything, full soundtrack. But what was interesting, all I wanted to say is that if you had it in English, you could play it in English. But if you would play it in Japanese, the character were redrawn in anime style. So that's all I want to say. As a weird tidbit.
I know the FM Towns. Yeah, the FM Towns was a big one in the early '90s, and all the Monkey Island games got ports of it. But let's move on to now away from LucasArts because we've talked about it for so long. To be concluded.